This is not quite a 303, sorry, but it's pretty close and I can't afford a real one, so let's just imagine from now on that this is a true, authentic Roland TB-303. Everyone knows the story of this synth, right? Back in the early 80s, the man who had worked on this and who would go on to design this was looking even as far back as 40 years ago for ways to replace musicians with machines. Drummers had been firmly crossed off the agenda, and now it was time to finally come for bassists. That's right, Roland's next machine was not to be another drum machine, but a bass machine. And so this man rooted through his mind for any as yet unused multiple of 101, and before we know it, the Roland 303 is born. Tadao! The man would answer when asked his name by confused journalists. For Tadao Kikumoto had just invented the 303, and it wasn't very good. People had a hard time programming it, and it didn't really sound like a bass. In fact, it sounded generally quite weird. And before long, this unsightly silver box had been deemed a failure and banished to experimental jank purgatory. Or at least it would have been, had a few cash-strapped Americans not rescued the now very cheap second-hand units, ignored their intended purpose, and invented the swampy, squelchy signature sound of acid house. And so that's the famous story. It transcended its mundane ambitions, so much so that the 303 is now maybe the best modern example of musicians pushing the boundaries of an instrument, creatively rethinking a product's purpose, ignoring its intended use case, and sending it to places the manufacturer had never imagined. Which is why it is so ironic to me that nowadays the 303 is maybe the single most typecast synthesizer. Like, there are other synths that push you in certain directions for sure, but come on, when you think of the 303, you're thinking of acid house. And sure, it's very, very good at acid house, and if history has anything to tell us, maybe it's not very good at much else, but here we have the poster child of musicians finding creative uses for an instrument, and yet I cannot think of a synth that is more pigeonholed nowadays in terms of how we, as musicians, expect to use it. Which is why I'm now going to spend this video trying to find a whole load of non-acid use cases for the 303. That's right, it's time to swing open the doors of acid house, trudge our way through acid garden, turn left off acid street, and make our way steadily towards bass town. Okay, so here we are at our Roland 303. Kind of the whole deal of this thing is that it's not the most fun to program, however, I want to use it as intended, so it's time to program it. The first thing that we're going to have to do is go into write mode. I've already got us a clear sequence here. The way that I did that was by holding down clear and highlighting the sequence, in this case the fifth one along. So if I play this, nothing's going to happen. The first thing we're going to do is go into pitch mode. The bass line I've got in mind has 4 pitches, and they are these ones. I've just realised that that's 5 pitches, however, onwards we go. Now we need to go into time mode by clicking this button, beep. And now it's time to determine how those notes that we just put in are going to live rhythmically along this 16-step grid. The bass line that we are doing, I am so sorry, it is for a Radiohead song. It is Weird Fishes, and it goes dum 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 dum. So I like to tap it out when I'm programming in the rhythm. So across our 16 steps, it's going to go like dum 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 dum. So that is 2 steps, then an extension of a... let's just figure it out. So I think that's dum 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 dum. So then we play that. Yep, perfect. Our last note is going to be an octave up, but we'll sort that out in a moment. In fact, we'll sort that out right now. We then go back into pitch mode, tap through our sequence. This is the note that we want to transpose up an octave, so while holding down the button, we click that. Now if we play through our sequence, There we are. Perfect. We've programmed in 1/8 of the bass line that we now need to program in for the song. So I've just programmed in a octave jump for that last note, but the other thing we can do here in pitch mode is program in whether notes are going to be accented or whether they're going to slide up to the next note. So we can tap through. I want this first note to be accented. I want the second note also to be accented. We'll slide into the note after this one. We'll have this one be accented. This one's also jumping up an octave, however we'll have that accented and we'll slide again. We'll then tap through the remainder of these because they're boring, and we'll hear how that sounds. Hello? Hello? There we are. I think that once we slow that down, I think that in the context of a mix and with a little more massaging of the sound, I think we can make that fit in the right place. All that's left to do is program the rest of the bass line to this song. So I'm going to do that now. Okay, no one saw that, right? I've already programmed it on the different bank. We'll go into play mode and we can actually pretty easily chain patterns on this thing simply by holding the first pattern and the final pattern that we want to play. So now I'll blast through this, but we have the full bass line of the track. There we are. Hey, welcome to the Professional Film Studio, little behind the scenes glance at how we do things around here. I've made the bass line now, and all we need is a backing track for it to go underneath. That sounds like this. It's very simple, really. All I've done is programmed a little drum machine beat, popped some guitar arpeggios on top of that, and we've ended up with our backing track, which, once it's in tune and in time, the 303 sounds like this. To be honest, I'm pretty happy with this sound, but what kind of cruel, unfeeling beast would I be if I didn't tell you how I did it? I found that the trick really was to be extremely boring with the 303's most interesting parameters. That means a low cutoff and low resonance. A big part of the acid house sound is the controls being changed during the performance. So to avoid the acid house sound, I just didn't do that. Mostly anyway. I did adjust the envelope and decay settings slightly during the recording, just so I could add a couple little articulations as a bassist might. I did also do a thing which I recommend to anyone trying to record a bass line, which was play in a bass register. That meaning that I transposed down an octave everything that I just showed you a minute ago. Most of the real contributions to this sound, though, were made in post-processing. I mean, for a start, look at this absolute nightmare of an EQ curve. I had to take out the majority of the overtones because they just stink of synth. But I did leave in the slightest amount of information just around the high mids and treble so that I could give a little texture to the sound. Before that EQ in the chain, it's just a bit of saturation at the start for some colour, then that goes into some compression, essentially treating it the same way that I would treat a bass guitar in a mix. But whatever, I don't want to talk about bass anymore. This video is about alternative uses for the 303, so we're abandoning bass. Let's start by replacing my janky guitar work with something a little lower in pH, if you know what I'm saying. I'm talking about 303 arpeggios. Hey, it's a new day. Mercifully, you can tell because I'm wearing different clothing and look different, and actually I have a tripod now, so everything's changed. Previously you saw me programming the 303 using its built-in sequencer. Thankfully, music technology has advanced in the last 40 years, which is good because I never want to do that again. So from now on we're doing all the control of that via MIDI. That wasn't the 303 you just heard, that was Operator on Ableton. The plan is I am going to record in the arpeggios onto the keyboard, get them all laid out, sounding right on Operator, and then that MIDI we're going to send through to the 303, do some sound design tricks using it. So you can join me on that. I'm going to play in the music now. No, I'm not. I already recorded it. And so now this is playing live, and I can make adjustments to this as we go. So I'm just going to kind of experiment with the sounds that you can produce. And while that happens, I'll get a voiceover version of myself to say something. I don't know. So when we're talking about using the 303 as a synthy synth rather than a bass emulation, the name of the game is constant adjustment. I'm trying my best not to make an acid sound here, but the truth of it really is that this synth doesn't have so much variety in the flavours it can produce. The sweet spots are very wide but also pretty similar. For the main arpeggio of this song, I found the thing that worked best to be a pretty simple, straightforward sound. So fairly low resonance, longish decay, low key envelopes, and I enjoyed the square wave oscillator over the saw for its slightly warmer, rounder tone. You can get some more variety out of the synth using accents and slides, and using MIDI, these are actually really easy to sequence in, but I found that in a repetitive part like this they did stick out quite awkwardly. They did get a bit more use in this, which is a second layered arpeggio which I wanted to add. For this one I used the saw oscillator for some contrast, and I was a bit quicker in the constant parameter adjustment. I think that layered like this, the 303 sounds pretty great. It's not acid, but it's definitely recognisable as a 303, even if these are really some pretty bread and butter synth sounds. So the 303 has given us a reasonable amount of non-acid mileage so far. I mean, we've got a fairly naturalistic bass line, it sounds okay, and we've got two synth layers which sound reasonably distinct, and neither of them sound too much like acid. So we're doing alright, I think. But I want to take it a step further. I want to try and make it so that every element you hear in this track is 303. What that would mean is making 303 drums. Is it possible to do that? Well, that's not actually that interesting a question, because what if I told you that the drums have been 303 this entire time? I've lied to you this entire time. Bet you've never seen a synth video with a plot twist before, and I double bet that you've never seen a synth video with this many changes in outfit, because this has taken me about a month and you've been watching for like maybe 10 minutes, so sorry about that. Now, if we're trying to get the most out of the 303 sound design wise, I find that a very good place to start is plugging in a keyboard. That's because the inbuilt sequencer is a pain, and sequencing it via USB, I don't know, it doesn't feel very immediate. So having this keyboard in front of me, I feel very comfortable kind of getting sounds out. And the trick really is that even though there's only one octave of actual physical buttons on the 303, you can get a lot further than that. So you imagine the lowest note is here, you can transpose that down. So this is your lowest note, which you can get here on the keyboard, but you also have the often neglected tune knob, so you can actually get all the way down to this like super low pitch. Then on the other hand, while this is the highest button, you can transpose that up an octave, and you can actually get even higher than that, because when you're playing back a pattern, you can actually go up an entire other octave. So that gives you up to, on the piano, which you can then bump up with the tune knob to. So like for a bass synthesizer, there's quite a lot of range in that. Aside from the knobs on the 303, your other two sound design tools are your slide and your accent. And both of those you can actually get in using a keyboard. So your slide, quite simply, you play two notes legato and it makes a slide. The accent, you hear that? You can just play an accent in by playing a loud velocity. So you can get entire control, every single sound you could possibly get out of the 303 just using a keyboard. Probably the easiest place to start is the kick drum. You think of this as a bass synth, so it probably doesn't take too much effort to get a kick sound out of it. The place that I started is, you know, pretty naturally. You play a low note, maybe with a heavy accent. You know, does that get you a lot of the way? Well, I found it's a little bit too tonal. You can, you know, take it to some big places with the resonance. Maybe do like a big filter sweep. But check this out. If I play a high note, unaccented, then let it slide down to the lowest note possible, accented. Well, that kind of sounded like ass. But if I turn the resonance down so there's more bass, cut off maybe halfway. Listen to that thump. So you can get a few variations on that, cut off. You know, that's a pretty heavy kick. And so if you record that in, isolate it, get a little bit of saturation on it and kind of cut out the very definitive transient of that so that you don't have too much left over at the end or the kind of high noise at the beginning, that's going to sound like this. Which is quite nice. But what if you want to make a snare? Well, tell me this. Do you hear it right now? What about now? What about now? Okay, fine, sorry, the snare was an enormous cop-out. I recorded the background noise made by the 303 and then kind of cut out a transient shape in Ableton and made it sound vaguely like a snare. But even though that's the sound I used in the track, I did, you know, find that yes, that is a bit of a cop-out. So the other way I found to make a snare, you turn the tempo up really fast and you play a sequence as fast as it will go. Maybe not that one. This thing's got a built-in distortion, so we'll kick that in. And then we'll take that into the DAW, put even more just absolutely revolting distortion on it. And eventually, with enough processing, you can get some disgusting noise that sounds like this. And then you can cut that out and make a snare out of it. Happy days. Okay, hi-hat. I was actually pretty proud of this one. So the place that my mind started was, okay, you can get some, you can get some pretty, you know, surprisingly high notes out of the 303. Maybe there's something here, like in the resonance. But no, I found that wasn't really the way. Instead, you want to take it all the way to the other end, right to the bottom of the keyboard. And as low as you can get it, so tune all the way down. Do you hear? Because the note is so low, you can kind of hear the resonance breaking up there. So if I get the resonance all the way up, maybe kick in that distortion again, you can hear that breaking up. Well, if you take that noise and put enough EQ and saturation on it, and then you put well, if you take that noise, put a resonator on it and some frequency shifting, mess it all about, kind of get some metallic sounds out of it, you can isolate this noise. And that's a goddamn hi-hat. And so the janky cover song that I've showed you only uses like 3 or 4 of these different samples, but I actually made well over 100 variations across the kick, hat, snare, other snare. There's quite a lot of samples here. You can get quite a lot of range out of this machine, including the following. And by the way, yes, obviously, I'm going to give you these samples at the end of the video. Just wait on one moment, please. You've got to earn them. There's a reasonable amount of damage that you can do with the 303. I feel pretty satisfied in its sound design capabilities. But what we haven't tested is its functionality as a live instrument. There's one more chapter of this video. Please stay with me. How do you do lead melodies with a 303? Well, to be honest, you just plug in a keyboard, really. The main thing you're going to have to keep in mind is that your maximum note length is really quite short. And so that's going to lend itself to a style that relies on a lot of short repeated notes, little grace notes, things like that. But otherwise, it's just like playing leads with any other monosynth, and you can get some really nice expression out of it. I've not done too much to the tone here. A little saturation, reverb, and some Juno-style chorus has brought it to a nice place, and you can also get some pretty good sounds with a touch of the built-in distortion. There's also room for some variation if you switch to a different waveform. For expression, you're mostly going to have your hand on the cutoff and resonance knobs, though there is some fun to be had using the accent knob as a kind of fake velocity slider. And obviously when you're bored of playing sensibly, you can ignore any nice sounding playing and just get really self-indulgent and start shredding. And this is great fun, and I strongly recommend it. The links to the drum samples are in the description. They're free, they're all yours, do whatever you want with them, I don't mind. Though I would be interested to see what you make with them, so please do let me know, and subscribe if you would like. No pressure. Bye.